Just one look, and I fell so hard in love. Is that enough to get a copyright ding for this video? Either way, I don't think anyone ever wants me to sing again. Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is Emcee Frodis. Over the 50-plus years Star Trek has been on the air, across the 14 franchise incarnations, there have been about 90 regular characters and hundreds of reoccurring characters who have enriched the story. This isn't a list about them. This is a list of the characters who only appear in one episode, but are due a second appearance. Some of these characters were expanded upon in the beta canon of Star Trek, but in the shows themselves never received anything outside of their initial appearances, and there are some interesting stories that could be explored with them. Number 10. Tai, Mirror Spock, and Mirror Uhura. For a character who only appeared in one episode, the bearded version of Spock from the Mirror universe is absolutely iconic. That evil goatee has permeated popular culture and is due for another appearance. I've put this at the bottom of the list because, as I've said in previous videos, I think the Mirror universe is a bit overplayed. But there is still a certain je ne sais quoi about these two in particular. Probably my hyper-focus bordering on fetish levels of devotion to all things Spock and Uhura. I do think there are some interesting avenues to explore with Mirror Spock, particularly if we're looking at him at the time of Strange New Worlds. This is still 10 years before he'll begin to change the Terran Empire, leading to the Alliance conquering the Empire. We've also seen that Sarek is a rebel against the Empire. So who exactly is Spock while he's under Pike? Is Spock's position on the Enterprise just to thumb his nose at his father? Which I suppose is kind of the same thing as in the Prime Universe. But what puts these two on the list is the other character, Uhura. We never get more than a glimpse of the terrifying, knife-wielding communications officer. To make matters worse, when it comes to ancillary media, most of it does focus on Mirror Spock. Mirror Uhura is often killed or not even present in the story, so she remains a mystery character even in beta canon. And really, we hardly got a look at her at all. We mostly have Primal Uhura's impersonation of her to go off of. I would like to see at least one more appearance of them to see how they become who they are in Mirror Mirror. And of course, I will take just any opportunity to have more Spock and Uhura. We've gotten a hint of Ethan Peck and Celia Rose Gooding playing evil as the Wizard Pollux and Queen Neve in the Elysium Kingdom, and they were... So let's give them another chance at some dark sides. Number 9. Junior. Technically, this character has appeared twice, but since the first time was only a brief appearance as a baby in Voyager's The Q and the Grey, I'm going off of his solitary appearance in Q2, where Q's son is played by none other than Q's son, Keegan Delancey. In that role, Junior plays essentially the same role as his father in early TNG, a malevolent trickster causing trouble for Voyager. But with the changes in the Q after Picard Season 2, what has happened to Junior? I don't know how many people remember this, but in the end of Q2, Q was actually charged with watching his son for the rest of eternity. What's happened to Junior now that his father has died? There's also a lot of questions as to what Q's death means to the rest of the Continuum. Are all of the members of the Continuum dying, or was it just Q? As he was such a prominent member, what effects did it have on them? And just on a personal level, what effect did it have on Junior? There's also the fact that Junior was very close to Icheb. Icheb was really his only friend ever. So how does Icheb's death affect Junior? Which could also bring some welcome storyline into what was a throwaway death in Picard Season 1. An appearance by Junior would also open up an opportunity to have other one-shot characters, such as Susie Plaxton's Lady Q and Olivia d'Abo's Amanda Rogers appear. Heck, if you really wanted to deep cut, Corbin Burnson's Q could also appear. The Q Continuum is littered with fantastic one-shot characters that could make a very interesting episode or even arc in any of the Star Trek series. Owing to their time-traveling and seemingly immortal nature, they can appear in any of the series, from Strange New Worlds all the way to Discovery. In fact, considering Discovery Season 4 states that the Q haven't been seen in centuries, it might be interesting to see what has happened to them in the intervening years. And while we're talking about the Q Continuum, Give us some confirmation to the long-known fact that Trelane was one of their numbers. Number 8, Captain Morgan Bateson. One of the most interesting things about this character is the actor who plays him. At the time, Kelsey Grammer was on one of the most popular shows on the air. It was a surprise at the end of this episode when the USS Bozeman gets out of the time loop and viewers could go, "Hey, isn't that Frasier?" From the TNG episode Cause and Effect, Bateson and his crew were pulled from 2278, almost 100 years into the future, where they ended up as part of a time loop with the Enterprise D. Once the crew of the Enterprise corrected the time loop, Bateson was presumably able to make a new life for himself in the 24th century. I say presumably because we don't actually know what happens. We just see the Bozeman get rescued. I think Star Trek missed an opportunity to show a character adjusting to the 24th century. We get to see a little bit of that with Scotty and Relics, but it would have been interesting to do it over a longer time frame. And I think it's still interesting to go back now. Again, this is another character who has technically had 2 appearances, as Bateson appeared in a voiceless cameo in Lower Decks, but it honestly just opens up more questions. Bateson, as we see him in Lower Decks, is working for Starfleet Intelligence. Give us the story! A time-displaced captain has to adjust to a world that has left him behind and eventually rises in the ranks of Starfleet Intelligence, where he works along the likes of Carol Freeman and Tuvok. This is a cool story! It's something that should be told. Number 7, Kivas Fajo. This character, played by Saul Rubinek, inspired an entire episode of Lower Decks, Keishon His Eyes Wide Open. While that is one of my favorite episodes of Lower Decks, I think the portrayal of the collectors in it are missing something incredibly important to Fajo. He was really, really scary. Fajo appeared in TNG's The Most Toys, kidnapping Data to add him to his collection of unique items. He was murderous, vaguely sexually threatening, and just an all-around unpleasant person. This is something that is left out of the Lower Decks interpretation of the collectors, who are just vaguely mean aside from the booby traps in House's collection. A reappearance by Fajo could also bring to light new revelations about Data. The fact that Data tried to kill Fajo and actually lied to Starfleet about it. 2 things he was thought to be incapable of. Even after Data's death, it would be interesting for his friends to discover some of the greater depths of Data. The collectors are really an intriguing idea in Star Trek. Avarice in a post-scarcity society. It's different than the Ferengis, especially in the case of Fajo, because he actually appears to be human. It doesn't become a random quirk of a species, but a clear sign that humanity hasn't evolved past greed. But it's just a societal choice of those living within the Federation. Add to the fact that the Ferengi are always treated as comical for their need to acquire, while Fajo was deadly in his desires. Number 6, Pell. After the last one, I think this is an interesting follow-up, and honestly, it could be interesting to have them in the same episode to create a contrast to how different human and Ferengi greed can be. Introduced in the Deep Space Nine episode Rules of Acquisition, Pell was also our first introduction to Ferengi females. Not only that, Pell kicks off the suffragette plot that continues throughout the end of the series. In order to acquire her own profit, Pell must disguise herself as a man working under Quark, and becomes his advisor. Things are complicated when she falls in love with him. While Pell has the Ferengi drive of acquiring, it's not the sum total of her character. In fact, she gives up her chance at profit in order to be herself. She would be the first Ferengi to show this potential. Even in this episode, the character we most associate with change in Ferengi, Rom, acts with the typical scheming self-interest. How has Pell changed over the years, especially as Ferengi society has begun to catch up with her progressiveness? As with the Q Continuum, revisiting Pell would allow us to revisit Ferengi society as a whole, something we haven't gotten the chance to do since the end of Deep Space Nine. It is well overdue a revisit. Number 5, Crawl/Captain Balthazar Edison. If there comes a day when I stop championing the Kelvinverse, I want you to call the police, because clearly I've been replaced by a pod person. Introduced in Star Trek Beyond, Crawl started out as Captain Balthazar Edison, a former Mako turned Starfleet captain who became stranded on a distant planet, using horrific means to extend his life as he slowly went mad. Krall exists in a unique place in the Star Trek universe. He's a character that should be fairly unchanged by the schism between the Prime and Kelvin timelines. While he survives up until the 2260s, he's far removed from the Federation by the time of the Kelvin incident, meaning the incursion by Nero would not have changed his fate. But everyone else is changed by the Kelvin incident, or as it is in the Prime timeline, the non-incident. How would the Prime Enterprise crew deal with an encounter with Krall? Revisiting him in the Prime timeline also gives second chances. While I love Beyond and will defend it as one of the greatest Star Trek movies until my last breath, even I can admit that Krall gets the short end of the stick in terms of characterization. It would be nice to have a second chance at that character to fully develop him. Number 4, the Gorn Captain. Of every character in Star Trek, I don't know if there's one who was more iconic after his solitary appearance as the Gorn Captain from the TOS episode Arena. In that episode, the unnamed Gorn Captain is forced to fight against Kirk in one-on-one combat at the whim of the powerful beings, the Metrons. What makes the Gorn Captain so intriguing, aside from his iconic first appearance, is what comes afterwards. From what we've seen of the Gorn in Enterprise and Strange New Worlds, they come off as much more animalistic. This is in stark contrast with Arena, where one of the biggest challenges Kirk faces was that the Gorn Captain was not only stronger than him, but matched him in intellect. I want to understand why there's such a disparity in the Gorn Captain from the newer interpretations of the species. As I commented on a recent episode of Strange New Pod, I wonder if there are variations in the Gorn species, and if the ones we see in Strange New World are like the feral cats of Gorn society, raised without proper socialization, and therefore given over to basic instincts. I think the only way to truly dig into that is to go back to the beginning and seeing that first Gorn Captain again. Number 3, Martis Mazur. While the Gorn Captain may be the most iconic, this character may be the most obscure. But that just makes him more intriguing to me. Martis Mazur appeared in the Deep Space Nine episode Rivals. An Elorian, Mazur used his abilities of listening to scam people. He causes havoc on the station by changing probability using a mysterious device. I think one of the most interesting things about Mazur was something that was not explored in this episode. That is, he was supposed to be Guinan's son. I think there's an interesting story in someone as wise and supportive of Guinan having this wild and scheming son. With several characters on this list existing in the same time period with similar MOs, cultural rebels who scheme for their own greed, there could be an interesting heist episode involving Mazur, Fajo, and Pell. I think an interesting dynamic could be developed between these three. Number 2, Captain Ma'a. I think this name might not be recognizable right off, but once the character is described, modern Trek fans will know who I'm talking about. Ma'a was the protagonist of the Klingon storyline of the Lower Decks episode Wei-Douge. An ambitious young man, Ma'a worked hard to reach the rank of second in command, eventually challenging his captain when he disagreed with the Klingons' alliance with the Pakleds. While this episode is highly regarded amongst Lower Decks fans, much more attention is spent on the character of T'Lyn, the Vulcan equivalent of Mariner, while Ma'a, an analog for Boimler, gets pushed to the wayside. I think this is a big mistake. While I adore T'Lyn, Ma'a opens up a lot of possibilities himself. He is a different type of Klingon, and it's a refreshing take on the species. While Klingons talk about honor, Ma'a exemplifies a very pure version of honor, coming from hard work and determination, rather than outlandish heroics. He does what is right, rather than what is most glorious. Ma'a is also the character in Wei-Douge who comes out on top. While T'Lyn is transferred to the Cerritos eventually, Ma'a ends up captaining his ship. He reaches his goal. It would be nice to see how he fares as captain, and if that can be helpful to the Federation. As Klingon Federation alliances should be improving with Martok and Worf in charge, it would be nice to see that with Ma'a teaming up with the Cerritos. And number 1, Mistral. I don't know if this one will come as any surprise, seeing as how I talk about this guy very, very frequently. Mistral appears in my absolute favorite Enterprise episode, Carbon Creek. In 1957, 3 Vulcans crash land and are stranded in Pennsylvania. Mistral is the team member who adapts easiest to human society and decides to stay when rescue arrives. There is so much potential here. A Vulcan was on Earth throughout the second half of the 20th century, over 100 years before official first contact. How did he fare? Mistral was in the middle of a romance with a human woman. What happened with them? Did they have any kids? There are just so many questions that are begging to be asked, and I would hope answered. Obviously, by the time of the current Star Trek shows, Mistral will be long dead. Vulcans may live a long time, but they don't live that long. But there are ways around that. As the episode originally appeared in, there could be flashbacks. Or we know very well that Star Trek is not above time travel shenanigans. Imagine if Spock was sent back in time to the 60s or 70s, while Mistral was on Earth, and Spock has to work with Mistral in order to get back to his home time period, gaining a deeper appreciation of humanity along the way. One thing has become clear to me over the making of this list, and that's I enjoy characters that go against the grain of their cultural expectations. So many Star Trek species are defined by a specific trait, but every once in a while the shows will allow someone to buck these trends. Unfortunately, a lot of those times these characters only get a solitary appearance, and I think it's time for them to get another shot on the screen. This also shows why Star Trek should really resume doing their short Trek series, or, if not that, go all out and introduce an anthology series where you can touch upon these characters without disturbing the ongoing plot lines of the currently airing shows. With such a rich tapestry of characters as we have in Star Trek, it can be hard to look back in on some of these one-shot characters who made an impact on previous series. I think it would be worth it to have a vehicle where they can give focus to an adventure with them. So comment down below with a one-shot character you would like to see revisited. If you like my videos, subscribe to my channel. We're well on our way to the next goal of 300. I do videos about Marvel, Star Trek, Star Wars, and lots of other geeky things. Be sure to catch the daily short series, The Headcanon Minute. Tuesdays is Trek Day. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can also buy me a coffee, or you can go to my Redbubble and TeePublic to buy my geeky graphic designs. You can find me on all of those platforms, as well as most social media, as Emcee Frodis. So until next time, live long, and may the Force be with you.